Hello, and thank you for being here again. This Sunday for us in the Catholic Church marks the end of this cycle of our liturgical year, which has been cycle C, because our Sundays are divided into 3 cycles, in which during ordinary time we concentrate in cycle A on the Gospel of Matthew, cycle B, the Gospel of Mark, and cycle C, the Gospel of Luke, with John being used mainly at the other times of the year, that is, during Advent, Christmas, Lent, and Easter. In those 4 seasons, we read a lot of John. And so you would have noticed perhaps that in my recent videos, I've spoken quite a lot about the Gospel of Luke, because we're reaching the end of the cycle C. And it's so beautiful to look back over this Gospel of his. What we should remember when reading the Gospel of Luke is that it is said that his main source was Mary, the mother of Jesus. And this is why, if you're looking for the infancy narratives, for example, the narratives about the birth of Jesus and so on, Luke's Gospel is where you will find those, because obviously he got this material from Mary. And we find a beautiful, really beautiful Gospel, beautiful outline of who Jesus was. He begins in his writings referring to Theophilus, who he's writing to. And Theophilus may or may not have been a person, but of course the name also means the beloved of God. And so in writing to us, you can say in this gospel, he's addressing us, each one of us, as the beloved of God. And when we see Christ's actions in the words of Luke, we see just how much God does love the world and just what his kingdom really is about. Because among the characters that we meet going through his gospel, time and again, we find these simple or unexpected people who are the heroes of the story. People who are just simply living their lives, but acknowledge him when they meet him, recognize who he is, and as such find their way. Obviously this starts with Mary, who is a girl in a small town in the Roman Empire, in what was considered a very far off, sort of out of the way place, who is called upon to be the mother of Jesus, and who accepts this calling. There's no false modesty, but oh no, not me, I can't possibly do that. But she accepts that calling because that's what she's called to do, giving us a fine example of what we should be doing with our lives. But we meet people who we would have never expected to be praised by Jesus. People who were, for example, recently we had the publican who entered the temple and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner," not daring even to raise his eyes to heaven. And Christ said he exited that temple justified. We meet people like Zacchaeus, who was a publican and therefore hated by the Jews because he collected taxes for the Romans, and who was one of that group who were known to not be honest. And in meeting Jesus, his life is changed, and he says that he will pay back whatever he has stolen from anyone fourfold. And Jesus says, today salvation has come to this house. We meet the Samaritan, as I said in an earlier talk, would have been a person despised by the Jews, who comes and asks for healing of his leprosy from Jesus and is healed, and recognizes that Jesus is who he is, and is sent away saying, "Go, your faith has saved you." And so we have these beautiful stories all the way through to the crucifixion. And the crucifixion is what we read about in our last Sunday's celebration of ordinary time in this cycle C, which is the feast of Christ the King, Christ reigning on the cross, which is absurd in worldly terms, and yet that's what happened. And we see Jesus with this man crucified next to him, who turns to him and says, Lord, remember me when you enter your kingdom. And Jesus giving that marvelous promise about, today you will be with me in paradise. So what an amazing story we've seen about how Jesus approached people, just what he was like in this world, and how even when he was hanging on the cross and they were jeering at him, making fun of him and saying, well, you saved others, why don't you save yourself and come down from the cross? He was much more interested in creating his kingdom of truth and joy and love and kindness and compassion and so on, where all, even the despised, the lowly, the humble, those on the margins, are all finally fully citizens of his kingdom. And that is his focus, not his own salvation, not saving his own life and coming down from the cross and putting on a show for those who are standing at the foot of the cross. And so we see a Jesus who truly brings into the world a completely different way of looking at our world, looking at our life, and how beautiful that is. In my meditations, I usually come across each week a prayer by an Italian man, Roberto Laurita, who writes some marvelous prayers in Italian. And his prayer for this week of Christ the King, I'll read you my translation of in English. And so he says, you who saved others, Jesus, why not save yourself? You who saved from the obscure forces of evil, why not annihilate the injustice, ill will, hatred, and jealousy that condemned you to death? You who healed bodily infirmities, who made the paralyzed walk, the blind see, brought the dead back to life, why not tear your ill-treated body from the cross? But what would happen if you really did come down from the cross and imposed your power on those who insulted you, made fun of you, who were pleased they'd sent you to your death? Perhaps we would have had to admit that our God is strong, frightening, and to be taken seriously, but not a God who loves madly and not based on merit. A God willing to give his life for love, just for love. And may you experience this love of God in your life. Thank you.